Welcome to Christy's Bits of Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Christy. My goal is to help you start your mornings off right by sharing a short story or a parable that will motivate and encourage you to live your best life with God. By using the infinite wisdom found in His Word, you truly can live a life of happiness and peace in Christ. I'm living proof. I hope you'll stick around and subscribe. Also, if you like what you hear, please share with your friends and family so they can scoop up some bits of wisdom for themselves. Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of the podcast. Today's Monday, June the 28th, and I hope you had a great weekend. I know it was really super hot here in Tennessee. I tried not to get out a whole lot, but when I did get out, I had fun. This week I'm going to do things a little bit different for each episode. This week I'm going to call it my how-to series. And I am not an expert on anything. So I want to just start off by saying that I'm not an expert on anything. So I'm not offering any expert advice this week. But I'm just going to tell you how to do things based on what knowledge I have of those particular things. So today I want to start out by how to write a book. um, like I said, I'm not an editor. I'm not a publisher. I am not a big name author, but I do have five self-published books, and I have ghostwritten 16 others. And I collaborated on another book with 24 other women, and I'm actually working on a book now with another lady, a friend of mine. So that's a lot of books for somebody that's not well known. Like I wish I was a household name, but I'm not. So anyway, so like I said, I'm not offering any expert advice on how to write a book. I'm not offering any expert advice on how to sell 1 million copies because I haven't done that for myself. But I just simply want to tell you how to get started, because I've had so many people. My first book came out in 2015. That's when I wrote my first book. And over the last 6.5 years, I have so many people ask me, how do I write a book? How do I write a book? If I had $1 for every person that has asked me that, I could buy that house on the beach that I've had my eye on for the last few years. um, Writing a book is not easy by any means. It's not. It's a very long process. It usually takes me about a year from start to finish, and it takes an enormous amount of patience. I will tell you that. Um, the shortest time it's ever taken me was my first book, and that was about 7 months. And that book was my first book. And if you had seen it when it first came out, you would have been like, oh my God, I'm not paying money for this. I did go back, however, after I put out my third book, I went back and revised that book. So it's a lot better now. It's probably still not where it needs to be. But you know what? It was my first book. And instead of taking it down from Amazon, I'm proud of that because it was my first book. Because that book represents an idea that I had and a plan that I went from start to finish. So it may not be the best book, but it was my very first one, and I'm proud of it. But anyway, um, like I said, it's not easy, and I think that a lot of people think that it is. Um, I've had so many people message me and say, "Oh, I want to write my life story. My life story would be a bestseller." No, your life story probably wouldn't be a bestseller if if your life story hasn't been something worthy of like Dateline or something, you know because we basically kind of all have the same problems in life. And if you're wanting to write, not to put anybody down or anything, but we kind of all have the same problems. And so my life story is no different from yours. Now, could your life story help somebody else? Yeah, probably. I'm hoping and praying that my breast cancer journey story helps other people, and it has so far. But is it going to be a bestseller? I don't know. Only God knows that. But I can't see where it would be because my story is pretty common. I mean, well, I don't want to say I can't see where it would be because, Only God knows that. But I will say this, my breast cancer journey is very common. What makes mine any different is that I just sat down and wrote it. I put it down on paper. I wrote the story. But I didn't do something that nobody else couldn't do. So we all have a story, and we can all tell our story, but that doesn't necessarily mean, you're going to have a runaway bestseller. So I just want to, let you know up front, don't get your hopes up, because just because you start a book and finish a book doesn't mean that you're going to be, you know, Stephen King right off the bat. I mean, you could be. I don't know. You could be. It might happen. I hope it does. But if it doesn't, don't be disheartened. Just keep on writing. Because I'll tell you why I write. Would I like to be a bestseller? Absolutely. I would love to make a lot of money from my books. I'm not going to lie. Um, but the reason that I write my books is because I have these stories inside me that I want to come out. I do it because I love it. And when you write, you have to do it because you love it. You have to do it because you want to share that. Now, if you have one person who reads your books, or if you have a million people who read your books, you have to do it for the right reason. So don't just think that, you're going to go into this and make $1 billion right off the bat, because not everybody's J.K. Rowling or, I don't know, what was that one lady's name that wrote those Twilight books, Stephanie something. I mean, that can happen, but it's a very rare, very rare. But anyway, the first thing that you need to do when you write your book is preparation. You have to have your topic. What do you want to write about? Like I said, do you have a story that you want to tell? Is it a real life story that you want to share? Is it your experience? Like I said, I had one lady say, my life story of me and my family would be a bestseller. And when I listened to her, I didn't discourage her, but after she got done, I thought, you basically have the same life that we all have. We've all had troubles and stuff. So you have to try to figure out an angle, and you have to try to figure out, what's special about your story that you want to add, or that you want to not add, but bring out. So if she feels like she can't just say, my kids gave me trouble when they were growing up, my husband cheated on me, and, I was sad. You can't just do that. You got to find something special about your story that will keep people intrigued. Um, so let's say she would say, my kids gave me trouble growing up. My husband cheated on me. Let's say her husband cheated with like 30 women and got 15 of them pregnant. Now that's like the hook, So, I mean, you have to find something that's interesting to draw out of your story that's going to make people want to read it. You got to figure out, do you want to write history? Do you want to write fiction? Do you want to write a children's book? There's many different genres that you can go into, that you can write, but you have to write about where your passion is, where your interest is, and you have to write what comes natural to you. I have a friend, Amy, who writes mystery books, and she does a fantastic job. When I read her books, I'm floored by her ability to keep the characters straight, to keep the clues straight. Like, she keeps all the clues. See, I'm not disciplined enough in my mind to remember like who my killer is, or my clues, or anything like that. And I would end up getting it all mixed up if I tried to write like that. So I can't do that. So I have to find, my genre, what I'm good at. But I do have a passion for God. And so I've written a devotional called Speak Life. Got it laying right here beside of me. I keep a copy on my desk. And that book went to #1 on Amazon in its category of prayer and spiritual books twice. So I feel like I found my is it called niche or niche niche or my genre where I'm gifted. Amy's gifted at writing mystery books. And although I love to read them, I could never write that. So I'm not even going to attempt to try to write something like that. You have to figure out, where your passion is and what interests you. And then whatever that is, that's what you'll be good at. The second thing you have to do is an outline. I have found that when I outline my books, just like in school, when we do our research papers, we always have to have an outline that we have to submit first. And that makes our research paper so much easier, and it keeps it all condensed and makes sense. And so when I have an outline for my books, I'm more likely to stick to the subject and it makes more sense. But like I was talking about earlier, my first book, The Letter, I didn't have an outline. I'll tell you what happened. I had never wrote a book before in my whole life, but I love to read. I've always been an avid reader. And in high school, I wrote a lot of short stories for English class. English was my favorite class. So I wrote a lot of short stories and I loved it. And so one morning, I had gotten laid off from the cell phone company I worked for. And I was really kind of sad, really depressed about that because I was making super good money there. But anyway, I'd gotten laid off with a bunch of other people. And I was like, now what am I going to do? So about 3 days later, I woke up with this story in my head. Like I just woke up one morning and had this story in my mind. And I just got my laptop, and I sat down in my recliner and I started writing. I didn't have anything else to do. I was home. So after a few days of that, my son was like, Mom, what are you doing? And I said, I'm writing a book. And he kind of got tickled and he went, Yeah, right. What are you doing? And I said, I'm writing a book. And he went, Oh, okay. I mean, even he didn't believe me, but I knew what I was doing. I had it in my head and I knew, like I said, it's almost like when I would type, instead of really paying a lot of attention to my laptop screen, it's like I would see the story unfolding in my mind like a movie was playing out. So right before I would type, the things were happening in my head. I know this sounds strange, but it's how it all came out. The things were happening in my head, um, and I typed it. And it was a good story too. It was a really good story. People loved it. I wasn't very polished, on my grammar, my punctuation, my sentence structure, the flow, and things like that. Things that come with, like after that, I took several classes. And I learned from other authors. I spent a lot of time with 5 other authors in that town I was living in who had way more books out than me. I attended classes at a local library. I did whatever I could to improve my writing skills. And I hope it paid off at least a little bit. I think it has. But anyway, so with my other books, I figured out real quick I needed an outline. So I would figure out my plot, and then I would write down everything. I would write down, how I wanted to start, what I saw happen in the middle, and then how I wanted the story to end. So I would write down all of my characters' names, their relationships to the main character, if one was a best friend, if one was a coworker, or just somebody they knew from the soccer field or whatever, another mom on the playground or whatever, or at the park. Um, and then I would flesh them out, as far as like what they look like, where they live. Sometimes, I would even get down to the nitty gritty of like, what they drove, what their houses look like. If that was needed in the story, I knew that I would have it and I wouldn't have to just suddenly just, make it up on the fly. So I can really get into that stuff if I have to. um, and I have found that, if I keep that all together somewhere, like in a notebook, or a friend of mine actually who is an author, in front of her desk on her wall, she has this huge bulletin board and she keeps post-it notes of all of her characters and like who they are. And now I don't think I could do that because I would lose track of where the post-it note was. So I take a notebook and I take like one sheet of paper and write front and back. I'll write the character's name at the top, who they are, and then I'll just write all about that person. So when I go to, maybe look for that character, try to remember something about that character, I just flip through the notebook and I have it. You have it right there, so I can refer to them whenever I need to. And then there's less likelihood of me making a mistake and maybe missing a detail or something. The third thing is actually doing the work. Now that you've got all your stuff in order, your outline, your characters, your plot, now you need to figure out how you're going to write it. And that can be hard for some people. I have read, a couple of people sent me, like they would send me several chapters at a time. And listen, I'm no expert, and I would tell them, I would say, look, I'm not an expert. Yeah, I'd rather you didn't depend on me to help you with this, because sometimes, I feel like I don't even know what I'm doing. So who am I to help somebody else or judge somebody else's? But I would help them, like, you have to watch when you start to write, popping back and forth. I noticed that a lot of people make the mistake of hopping back and forth between past tense and present tense. You really got to watch that, because that's easy to do. It just takes like one word, and that will mess the reader up. The reader will be like, what's going on? Because readers catch everything. See, what happens is when we're busy typing, we just type along. And that's what the importance of an editor, and I'll get into that later, but they catch everything as well. But anyway, so, you have to figure out your tense. Do you want it to be set in the present or in the past? And then you have to figure out how you're going to write it, your POV, and that stands for point of view. And your point of view is the narrative voice, in which you tell your story. So, like in my latest book, Cancer, God, and Me, which, details my breast cancer journey, I wrote it in first person because I was the one who was telling my story. So it stood to reason that that's how I'd write it, because I was telling my own story. So I told what I felt and what I did and so on. Now, in my opinion, second person is the hardest way to write, because that way of writing, I don't really understand that a whole lot, so I'm not going to go into big detail about it, but that is centered around the pronoun you. And it helps to draw the reader into the story, but that can get really confusing, and it's easy to bounce back and forth out of that style. So I totally avoid second person altogether. I don't even think I've ever written a short story or a paper in second person. But my favorite way to write is third person. And that's just the author telling the story about other people. And we use pronouns like he or she or they or whatever. And like, for example, um, my friend who writes the mysteries, she will take a chapter and, like, for example, one chapter will be from the point of view of her main character, Mikey Bridgewater, and she will write that chapter in from the point of view of Mikey Bridgewater, and then she'll go and maybe the next chapter she'll take it from, let's say, Mikey's boyfriend, say his name would be Jake or something, and she would write it from his point of view. So yeah, so there's different styles, different ways that you can write. And so when I was a ghostwriter, I actually worked with this girl, Amy, who, my friend Amy, who writes the mystery books, and we wrote cozy mysteries for a company that I can't tell the name of the company because we had to sign NDAs, and we can't, we weren't allowed to tell that we wrote these books. I mean, because we wrote them under a pen name, and now each book was dedicated to me and Amy, so that was pretty nice. But we've never been able to tell it or even put it on a resume that we worked for this company and the books that we wrote. But trust me, together we wrote 16 of them. but but anyway, what we would do there, and I'm going to wind this up and do part 2 tomorrow. I'm going to wind it up right after I explain this because I'm going on 20 minutes now. But anyhow, what we would do there, our boss, the owner of the company, he had in mind what he wanted each series to be about. And so he would kind of give us like an overview of, say, for example, I want to do books about a bakery or a coffee shop, because that was, I was doing this in 2017, and that's what was really in at that time, like on Amazon. And then he would just give us carte blanche to write whatever we wanted to. Like he would say, I want, 2 characters. He would just give us a real sparse overview, and he just gave us the ability to kind of just do what we wanted with it. And I loved it. So Amy was the plotter. She plotted each chapter. I think each book had like 20 chapters, and she would plot each chapter and then send me 5 or 6 bullet points for the chapter. And then I was allowed to just completely make up the characters and write the stories. And I loved it. I loved that job. I had so much fun. It was set in a fictional town in New England. And yeah, I mean, I even made up like what the characters look like, um, just everything, what they wore, what kind of dogs they had, and I loved it. I mean, I just love to escape my own life, and go into that New England town and spend all day and half the night there. It was just really fun. But anyway, like I said, this has been 20 minutes, a little over 20 minutes, and uh, this might end up being like 3 parts because I have a lot. There's a lot of pages to this, and I can't condense it all into one video or one podcast. So I'll leave you there, and I'll pick up tomorrow and start with like finding the motivation and tell you how, like, when you don't feel motivated or you're tired, um, we'll talk about how to go from there. But anyway, I hope that that I've said something that helps you to want to sit down and want to write a book. And I will catch you guys tomorrow.